Hey guys, Danny here. I'm going to be brief here because I can tell this video is going to be a long one. Today I'll be looking back at the Lisa RPG series and seeing how well they hold up compared to how I remember them. I'll be reviewing them in the order in which they came out and at the end discussing the series as a whole. So without further ado, let's get to it. Also, huge spoiler warning for a series with a great story. If you don't want it spoiled, this is your first and only warning. Lisa, or Lisa the First, is what the series began with, being a fairly short but harmless Yume Nikki clone focused on exploring Lisa's mind to find VHS tapes to try and escape her abusive father Marty. The main theme of the game is the abuse that Marty did to Lisa and the mental damage it left on her. The visuals and atmospheres are surreal in the way that they portray Lisa's damaged mind. However, the only area that takes place outside of Lisa's mind is the house, which is bleak and hopeless and Lisa being trapped inside. While short, the game can be very depressing without any of the humour that makes the later games and themes more enjoyable to go through, to put it nicely. The game ends with Lisa, unable to cope with what's happened, committing suicide. Lisa the First can be beaten in its entirety in under an hour, even if you don't know what you're doing. However, it sets up a lot of context for events and characters later on in the series, as this suicide is the catalyst for a lot of character tensions. It's also completely free, so I'd recommend it if you want to give the series in its entirety a try. However, it isn't compulsory to play to understand the rest of the series, but it's as good a starting point as any. On a much lighter note, Lisa the Painful is the second game of the series and is by far the longest. Not really much of an achievement, seeing as you can beat the entire trilogy in under a weekend. It's an Earthbound-inspired post-apocalyptic RPG. The protagonist of the story is Brad Armstrong, Lisa's older brother and master martial artist. Story. Brad's story is focused on him taking the blame for everything that happened to his sister onto himself and trying to find salvation through his surrogate daughter named Buddy. Why is this important, you might ask? Because Buddy is the only girl left on planet Earth. In the apocalyptic event only known as the Flash, and every woman on Earth was gone. The setting for this world, I would say, is the most depressing idea imaginable, as without Buddy, mankind as a species coming to an end is inevitable. This has led to a degenerate world where the only accepted currency is pornographic magazines, and once word of Buddy's existence gets out, the whole world is after her, and she's gone missing. This spurs Brad onto a quest to try and find his daughter and go back to the peaceful life they had together. Brad is also damaged by what happened to his sister to the point where he's addicted to a drug called Joy, described as making you feel nothing while under its influence, but taking too much can lead to you transforming into what are dubbed Joy mutants, hideous and deformed creatures barely resembling the people they once were. The game has two main antagonistic forces, the first being Buzzo and his men. Buzzo was Brad's joy dealer as well as Lisa's best friend before she died. He hates Brad and blames everything on his weakness and inability to stop Marty, deluding himself of the fact that he could have helped. This also shows us that Lisa was not a fully good person, and Jorgensen himself has even said that as a person Lisa is by far the worst in the series. There is also Rando and his army, considered the most powerful group in Olathe. Rando himself was Brad's adopted son, Dustin. However, Buzzo in a fit of rage hacked into his face with his saw. Brad, again blaming this on himself, abandoned Dustin to try and keep him safe. Brad's mentality is slipping throughout the story too. From very early on in the story we see him throw himself into violent fits of rage at Rick, and these worsen throughout the game as Brad's addiction and withdrawal get worse. Brad, after finally building a boat to go to where Buddy has gone, manages to find her on an island with an older Marty, having turned over a new leaf with his daughter's suicide, and like Brad, trying to do the right thing by raising her. Brad, in an addiction-fueled rage, flies into one of the most crushing boss battles I can think of, where you are forced to murder Marty for what he did to Lisa, and stop him from doing the same to Buddy, despite the fact that he probably won't. Brad's paranoia kicks in, and even though you have the option to spare him, Brad refuses, giving in to his rage and killing Marty. Buddy escapes again and flees to Rando and his men. Brad is now desperately chasing after her and is slowly beginning to mutate. After finding Rando and the remaining men of his army, Brad murders all of them, getting filled with arrows and covered in stab wounds along the way, ending in the final fight against Rando, using the same style of martial arts as Brad. The game ends with Brad realizing everything he's done so far, and asking the most important question, before cutting to credits. Gameplay. Like most RPG games, Lisa the Painful is set into two clear sections, overworld and battle. Both of these things have their own twist. The big one for the overworld section is the game takes place on a 2D plane, similar to how 2D platformers go. By making use of the height and falling off of ledges leads to fall damage and can become a real issue. You can, however, lessen this by using a bike you unlock relatively early into your playthrough. This also helps you jump over small gaps and look for secrets, a huge part of the game's overworld exploration. Exploring the world around you is key if you want an easier time. You can find hidden stashes of mags or entire side areas like the nice houses, which can help you gain some levels if you feel you're behind. Exploring is vital and incentivized given how rationed out items are without exploring, meaning that exploring and finding as many goodies as possible can seriously help you. The best example of this I can think of are the fire bombs, which can give you an incredibly easy time in early bosses. However, some later bosses are weak to them, so using them sparely can help you. Meanwhile, in battle, the defining mechanic of Brad and a good few party members is the combo system, where instead of using a move from the menu select, you input a set of commands with the WASD keys in order to use the move without added damage from the individual key presses. This can be incredibly satisfying, especially when using multiple party members with the combo mechanic, like Bo the guitarist who can play music to buff and heal your team. You really find yourself memorizing your favourite moves and knowing how to do them purely off of muscle memory. Another mechanic that involves Brad and potential party members is Joy Withdrawal, wherein after an extended period of time without taking Joy, Brad and some members will enter a withdrawal phase, most of them losing a lot of damage in battle. Brad loses a lot of his attack and his combo moves do no damage in this state, while characters like Roger lose almost all accuracy. This can be supplemented by either resting at a campsite or inn or using Joy. However, the more Joy you use, the more frequently your characters will be going into withdrawal. This adds to how genius the game's item design is. Every small choice you make with items has a greater impact, from not being able to capitalize on a firebomb later on, or having to make the call of the raw DPS of taking Joy compared to its more frequent withdrawal periods. On the other hand, trying to stop withdrawal by sleeping at a campsite is a risky game, as unless you're staying at an inn where you're guaranteed safety at a cost, you're at the mercy of the world around you, and can fall victim to a chance encounter. These can range from being left a random consumable, to a party member being kidnapped by a local gang, when you have to pay up, as if you try to fight them, they will perma-kill the party member before the battle. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention, there are a lot of party members in this game, 30 total. Most of them can join you for either mags, returning an item to them, or a small side quest, such as the Russian roulette minigame to unlock buckets, one of the best DPS party members in the game. Some of my personal favourite party members include RT, a homeless man who attacks mostly by throwing whatever he's carrying in his duffel bag at the enemy, Sonny Baklowitz, a schizophrenic ex-wrestler who clotheslines his opponents relentlessly and only feels comfortable talking to Harvey, the dead Great Dane he wears across his head, and Harvey Alabaster, a fishman lawyer who doesn't speak the fishman language, so in court he just insults the judge's wife and questions her sexual dignity. He attacks by throwing legal documents at the enemy to induce stats effects and paper cuts. There are two main types of party members in the game, TP and SP. SP functions like most other SP systems in an RPG game, however TP is different. It starts in a battle very low, and builds up over time by taking and dealing damage, meaning that TP characters, if built up long enough, can be some of the best raw DPS characters and can take a mean hit. There is also the fan favourite and first party member you get, Terry Hints, a great tutorial on how the game's battle system is not built entirely around damage. How does he teach you this? Not through long-winded tutorials spelling everything out to you, but because his attack in the beginning of the game deals 0 damage to enemies. However, his utility at this stage in the game is unmatched, like the ability to upset enemies, making them cry, and damaging their accuracy. The best part about this is that most of these characters are completely optional to recruit. Only about 4 of the 30 are required to beat the game. The rest you have to gain through exploring and interacting with the world around you. However, this does mean that some can be gotten rid of permanently, as I mentioned earlier, with random situations like them leaving you permanently in the night, or just having their head torn off mid-battle. There's no way to bring back a dead party member. However, a new party member can pick up an all-1 slot very easily. That's because Lisa the Painful is designed to completely nullify level grinding. Most enemies you can rematch, don't give enough experience to be worthwhile, and every other enemy in the game is a one-time encounter. Giving just enough experience means that every boss you're at the perfect level to fight them, not over or under level. If you ever are in a situation where you need to grind, the best way to do so is just to explore and find optional areas and bosses, because they give a lot more experience than just grinding on snakes will. The game's difficulty is perfect, however there is an optional pain mode that adds more challenge to the game by making every save point a one-time use, and adding more challenge to certain bosses, as well as some new ones. Also, there's a quality of life mod that I would recommend to anyone wanting to replay the game, with supercharge stations for every major boss, where you can increase their strength for added challenge. There's also other features that I would recommend for anyone wanting to replay. If you find the game too hard, I would recommend one of two party members, Birdie or Fly. Birdie is a drunkard who has the single best move in the game, Gasoline Spit, where you make an enemy incredibly weak to fire damage and have a high chance of blinding them, crippling their accuracy. The other member I recommend is Fly. Super Puke is a strong contender with Gasoline Spit for the best move in the game, not allowing the huge damage from fire weakness, but instead applying up to 6 stats effects on the enemy, plus his normal attack hits every enemy on the field. As you can tell from the way I've been describing these last few characters, the game is a lot lighter than my earlier segments would seem to imply. This is entirely because of the fact that most of the game not relating to the overall plot and more focused on the small adventures of Brad and your party are actually really quite funny, meaning that outside the very beginning and very ending of the game, it's a very light game focused on dark humour, but never afraid to just be silly. Some of the smaller adventures you can go on include befriending a group of men LARPing as the Power Rangers, meeting and murdering a perverse Jim Sterling, known as Slave Lord Jim, servicing clients at the Beehive Brothel, and visiting the last remaining fast food restaurant, where the mascot, Wally, is worshipped as a god and orders are given to him in prayer. This game can seriously be hilarious. Meanwhile, in its more serious moments, can be one of the hardest hitting stories I've ever experienced. Choices are something Lisa the Painful does perfectly. Throughout the game you're offered a lot of choices, the first of these being offered barely 20 minutes into your playthrough. Your first party member Terry is taken hostage, and you're forced to ask, which would you rather keep, Terry or all the items you've acquired up to this point? Lisa the Painful is incredible at forcing you into choices that actually matter. Compared to its contemporary RPG, Undertale, where the main choice is do you kill everything to go for the good ending, or kill everything for the bad ending, Lisa forces you to make actual choices, by having none of them matter on whether there's a good or bad ending, but they're more based around what you, the player, think matters more. The most infamous of these are when Buzzo, towards the beginning of the game, holds a party member hostage, and towards the end of the game, holds every item you've ever collected hostage, and forces you to sacrifice an arm for both. Both times you lose an arm is debilitating, a huge hit to your stats and removing some of your combos. If you lose both arms, Brad can no longer use combos at all, most of your move list is now also gone. Every time Buzzo forces you to make a choice, you can either fight him or try and talk him out of this. Instead of going the easy route and making this the guaranteed best choice, Buzzo is a completely unbeatable boss. You need to make sacrifice, something Jorgensen even mentioned back in the Kickstarter for the game, saying, "I hate playing a game knowing that if I make a choice, it has to be the one that I know the game wants me to do, or the safe option, the one that leads to the good ending. The choices you will make change the core mechanics of the game. It's not just superficial. I want the player to really have to make sacrifices and for the game to affect the interior core of your experience." The soundtrack was mostly composed by Jorgensen and it fits most scenarios in the game well. The range is quite large, from quiet atmospheric tracks, more relaxed background tracks, goofy battle themes to blood-pumping boss battle themes. Also, with most battles being unique and all having their own theme, it really adds to every battle being special. Lisa the Painful also has a very unique look, where most of its Earthbound inspiration was pulled into. Jorgensen's strong suit as an artist lies in body horror, something I feel he knows well, as every Joy Mutant is really well designed. Another design I'm fond of is Wally, going from a Ronald McDonald-esque clown fast food mascot. Through the boss battle, more of his mask tears away, revealing there's nothing but raw flesh underneath it. Jorgensen is great at telling a story through character design alone. Every location is also designed to be distinct to make exploration much easier, as well as the fact that most areas are designed to be hard to get into but easy to get out of, minimalising backtracking. Now on to the final game in the trilogy, Lisa the Joyful. Lisa the Joyful Lisa the Joyful. It's a sequel for Lisa the Painful, set immediately after The Painful ends, focused on Buddy trying to make her own way in life, having to come to terms with the world she lives in. The plot's focused on Buddy trying to take down the warlords of Olathe in order to consolidate her own power and validate herself with the help of Rando. Throughout the plot, we are given revelations on who Buddy's father is and why the Flash happened. However, we are never told too much about anything to completely ruin mysteries within Painful. As well as this, every character of importance from Painful has an ending to their arc. The two of most importance here are Buzzo and Rando. The game's primary theme, from what I can gather, is one of choice, as Buddy has always had what is right for her decided by other people, and now Buddy is doing her best to try and regain this power over her own life. In battle this time, Buddy is a TP focused character, which you better get used to as she is the only party member throughout almost all the game. For a small section towards the beginning of the game, Rando parties up with you, however he leaves not too long into the game. And yes, while it is good to have one character who can output DPS as well as a lot of stats effects, there is a lack of ability of healing and outputting DPS in the same term. On the topic of DPS, most of Buddy's special attacks have a timing mechanic built into them, meaning to maximise damage you'd have to perform a timing minigame correctly. This can lead to some frustration however, as the only way to deal consistent good DPS in the late game is to be good at these timing minigames. The main way to alleviate this is through taking joy, as Buddy has not been taking joy long enough to be going through withdrawal, so there's no downside to taking it and completely wrecking enemies with the DPS it gives you. The main issue with the battle system is that most of Buddy's DPS moves don't really differ from one another, lacking a certain element of replay value that Lisa the Painful had. Buddy also plays very differently to Brad in the overworld. Instead of requiring a bite to jump over one tile, Buddy can simply jump over the two on her own. This leap can also help in combat. Get the jump on an enemy correctly and you can simply take them out before the battle even begins. Items in Joyful are also very limited, especially mags and healing items, so minimizing damage enemies can do to you is vital to make sure you can heal against bosses. Items also limit themselves, as all the vendors if interacted with without wearing a mask will attack, and even then one of them will mutate into a joy mutant about halfway through the game. And while most games in the series have been depressing up to this point, Lisa the Joyful is the most emotional and raw, especially towards its ending, as Joyful lacks a lot of the humour the Painful had, mostly because of how concise the story is. I'd say you can beat the entire game in about 2 to 3 hours, if that. One aspect of the story that Lisa the Painful had that I'm very glad was expanded upon was Buzzo, as through his exploration in Joyful, which I've heard some people call unnecessary, really adds to his character and makes him more than just the evil for the sake of evil person he was in Painful, torturing Brad for seemingly no reason. In short, I think that Joyful has the perfect ending that the Lisa series could have asked for, showing that in the dying world, Buddy is their new hope, and that all of the issues caused by Marty and Lisa all those years ago have finally come to an end, with the world moving into a new era. Conclusion time. Is the series worth getting into? You've been asking that at this point. Some of my personal favourite games of all time in one neat trilogy you can beat an entire weekend. I highly recommend that you play them. Sure, I've gone on enough about the plot to spoil most of it, however the small adventures along the way are really what's worth it. Also, if you've played the entire series, you can replay with the quality of life mod I mentioned earlier, or even then again, if you really like the gameplay but wanted something completely different, Lisa the Hopeful and Lisa the Pointless are two fantastic fan games, set in the same universe, given the same style, love and care that the main games had, both of which are completely free but quite long. That's all for now guys, take care.